Good morning.
Good morning, Cary.
So I guess in these unprecedented times, the question I would have is, how do we find some peace in our own minds with all the uncertainty?
Yeah, I think that's what people are dealing with, and I think about it a lot too. I think um, the defines how we deal with this when you talk about peace in our own mind is we begin to separate what's happening externally from what's happening internally. And I know that a lot of times I think our lack of balance or peace comes from the fact that we have don't have more sense of control, right? Happening out
Yeah.
there. Every day it's changing, and every day, there's different messages. Some are dire, some are less dire. And so we could blame our lack of peace on the media, on the lack of direction, on this virus. So where we make the shift is where we totally turn that around and we begin to focus on the internal universe as opposed to our internal world. The problem or the challenge for a lot of us is a lot of people don't have the tools, have developed the tools to do that. So now is the time. There's people who have the tools, and we can talk about that. And then the other ones who have never really even thought about the tools to deal with an internal crisis, right? I mean, the crisis is external and the crisis is internal. There's a lot of things we can do to, of course, to relate to what's going on externally differently, so that we're not as much in turmoil internally. So there's a lot of different kinds of intervention. Just that, uh, we have to start paying attention to what we're paying attention to. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I think paying attention to what we're paying attention to, and then in addition, this is still external, but to interpret what's going on, the way we interpret data is a lot to do with what then stimulates the discord within us. So again, coming from a deeper point, we focus on the discord internally, which we won't go to at the moment. We'll just go to, well, what are the stimulants? So one way is to begin talking about reinterpreting the data so that it doesn't have the effect of causing such dis-ease.
Yeah, there is so much external data right now that it's a different time from times I remember when I was younger, that it's really difficult to decipher what is actually true and what is actually being um, hyped up, made up,
Yeah.
uh, and and that also causes some discourse because finding that reliable source is not as simple as it used to be.
No. I jump on that a little bit, is that even all of the sources are still dependent or interdependent on how we interpret it and how we are. It's really interesting to bring up, like we will gravitate towards a media narrative or a narrative that fits our fears or fits our preconceptions or fits our biases. So that's really tricky, because again, we could say such and such media outlet or such and such, has the right point of view, but that's relative too, because relative to what we think is right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I met these, it's interesting. We had an accident in front of our house last night, and the CHP was here and the 4 fire trucks, and these guys came in. I wanted to talk to them about the event. And the fireman comes up and says, "Hey, I'm Captain, so and so, Captain Smith," and he shakes my hand. And I was like, "Okay, that's cool." I'm okay to shake his hand. He didn't even think about it. And then
No.
Officer Jones comes in from the CHP, comes up, young guy, shakes my hand. And I kind of said, "Oh, is it okay to shake hands?" He goes, "Oh, right, okay." I mean, these guys are clued in, but they're interpreting the data differently, aren't they?
I think they're interpreting it differently, but it's a change in how we relate to people. And when we've been doing something our whole life, like shaking hands is a sign of respect and connection,
Right.
it's really strange. I had somebody that I went to shake their hand, and I presented my elbow, and they weren't ready for the elbow. They reached the hand, and I'm like, no, we're touching elbows now.
Oh, yeah,
I
right.
mean, that paradigm shift that doesn't happen overnight.
No. And it will go back to in history. I looked up once why men take their hats off as a, back in the day, or tip
Yeah,
their hat. Do you know why they did that?
no,
To show they had no weapons under their hat.
makes sense.
Yeah, so now we're touching elbows to show we have no, weapon of the coronavirus on our elbow. It's so fascinating, isn't it? There's always
Yeah.
rituals and meaning behind. Um, so we have to be careful, right? Because we're not wanting to create more disconnect. But again, it goes back to interpretation, right? If you interpret poison and disease all around you, then you're going to respond differently. And so, like you said, what's the truth? Um, so and later in the week when we go into another presentation I'm going to do later in the week, I thought about this and I thought about in terms of our tradition. So people don't like to hear this, but it's the truth. It's the relative truth, which is we do a lot of meditation on death, and in a positive way. The reason is because we have a conception that death is sort of an exception. It is sort of rare. But if you turn it around and you look objectively, death is all around. In a sense, our vulnerability is huge. We take a
Yes.
microscopic virus, you can't even see it, and it kills you. So we say that death, if we were home last night, that tree fell on the house, or it could have fallen in a different direction. Each instant, even right now, the only thing that's keeping us here is our breath, right? In and out and in and out. Anything could happen in any instance. So actually, we live much more mindful and in a way more healthily if we come to terms with the fact that we have this precious gift of life. It's surrounded by the possibility of death. We're very vulnerable. So what we compare? So people are having this insight now with coronavirus, but it's always in there. It's nothing new.
Hmm.
But because people don't, it's new to them, then the response is fear, distancing, anger, anxiety. So that's interesting, isn't it? So we have to get beyond that reaction to the fact that we just have a new label now, coronavirus. But the vulnerability was there before the coronavirus became a narrative, right?
Oh, the vulnerability is amazing. I remember talking with my grandparents, and both my grandfathers were in World War II,
Exactly.
and they saved they saved jars instead of Tupperware. They used stuff that got thrown away to reuse because they didn't have the ability like we do today. That I want a latte, so I'm going to go use my phone, and I'm going to have a latte delivered in 20 minutes,
Mhm.
and the ability for people to have self-responsibility in this situation, as well as if we had an earthquake or another event,
Right.
a fire and stuff. I think in our lifetimes, we've had several events, but none of them yet have been to this magnitude. So having the ability to assess those vulnerabilities, but then also have the thoughtfulness to have a few of the things in place that reduces some of that vulnerability, which
Yeah.
includes the breathing and maybe that that cup of soup you have in case you get hungry. Some of those things I think are really challenging for people I see right now, and that mentality of that external pressure is something that feels real, although its effects individually can be downsized by that internalization of
Right.
I'm doing my best I can today, and these are some of the tools that I've learned to help me with my mental state.
Yeah, and you brought up a lot of good points. One thing, again, is what you articulated is where what we call suffering has become, or difficulty has become more and more context related. So your grandparents that, they're in the trench, I mean, wherever they were, they're in war. And to them, this is not the same. We have food, we have, you can't get your latte, but you still have coffee in your house. It's ridiculous. So I think that's why they call it, this is a really suffering situation, is because it's been created in the sense of what it is that one is able to endure. And as we've created a lifestyle of more and more comfort, then the lack of comfort is called suffering, which is not really, you know, I mean, that is suffering for people, but it's so self-created. The other thing that you reminded me of is interpretation. So you had said at one point, what's hard to discern in terms of the media and stuff, what's true, what's not true. And I would say, I don't know if you're familiar with my story of the three umpires. Did we talk about that at some point? So yeah, I'll just repeat it here for the moment. Is that three umpires are talking and having a beer after a game, and the first umpire says, there's balls and there's strikes, and I call them as they are. And the second umpire says, well, there's balls and there's strikes, and I call them as I see them. And the third one says, no, there's balls and there's strikes, and they ain't nothing until I call them. So one thing we'll say is the second umpire, there's balls, there's the media, and there's the data, and I call it as it is. So I'm going even
Yes.
deeper. I'm going deeper, saying, no, there's the data, and the coronavirus and the panic and all this stuff doesn't exist until I call them.
Mm.
And that's would be, to me, the place that would be ideal to get to. So, and it's not about, and it does happen, people are Pollyannish and go, oh, well, yeah, no, actually this whole thing's we're very lucky because we get to connect with our family more and we're going out less and pollution is down. I don't mean like that. That could be authentic, or that could just be, painting a rosy picture. But to realize that it's all this stuff, it doesn't exist until we label it.
Mm.
So there's balls and there's strikes, and they're nothing till I call them. So here we are. What do you want to call them? And what you were saying is that well, one media outlet calls it this, and one media outlet calls it that, and then the president calls it this, and then the governor calls it that, and it's so fascinating. It's all just labeling. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think part of the fascinating thing, if we read between the lines, is that as a country and society, I don't want to say we're soft, but we're
Oh,
unprepared.
well,
And the magnitude of this situation, with that unpreparedness, it is difficult, and understanding that there's going to be suffering and trying to reduce my own family and my friends' vulnerability, in the reality that there's going to be more suffering before it's over.
yes.
And then when we come out on the other side, um, how we've stayed positive and hopeful through this challenging time. And
Yes.
you mentioned, we all breathe, and breathing and our meditations are really, really critical. And for those people that may not have those tools, are there simple things they can do to help adjust their mindsets?
So I think initially, without doing something, it's not going to just happen, right? So so we talk a lot about mind training. So this takes training, but people can train very quickly. Here's if people are open to it, what I'd say is start with, so the problem when we talked about in the beginning, the problem is an internal one. That's one we're talking about. So if we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about an internal one, we can't just say, okay, I won't get anxious anymore. It doesn't work. because we're trained to be anxious. So we have to retrain. And the retraining at this point is just the easiest one and the best one is to spend 3 to 5 minutes watching the breath. And I'm going to put something on top of this, by the way. So you watch the breath to get the mind settled. And then, the inhalation on the you watch the breath on the exhalation, you count 1. The next exhalation, you count 2. Next one, you go 3. If you've done this, you don't need to do the counting, but for people who new. And when you get to 10, then you count backwards, 10, 9, 8 to 1. If you can do 3 rounds of those, and if your mind wanders and you catch it, that's the deal. It's not like, oh, I'm not going to wander. You are going to wander. We're
Sure.
trained to wander. That's not, you didn't fail because you wandered. You only fail if you don't catch it and come back. Okay, so that's 3 rounds or 1 round, whatever's going on. And then in the practice we do at this point is you actually you sort of provoke yourself for about 2 or 3 minutes on allowing the anxiety to come up. You reflect, you remember a newscast or article you read or someone said something. But instead of going into it, you just watch the anxiety. Just like and the breath is still going on. And in the background, you're keeping a focus on the breath. But and with specifically the anxiety or the emotion, I should say, it could be fear, it could be anger. You're watching arise, abide, fall away. Arise, abide, fall away.
Nice.
And the problem that we have is we see it as permanent. We don't see the arising, abiding, falling away.
Got it.
That's what I would suggest at this stage.
Those are great suggestions.
Just simple, just keeping it simple. And then later we can get more advanced, but there's no reason to we can't be advanced when we're not used to doing this. Right. Just connecting with the breath, 3 to 5, 6 minutes, whatever. You can do 3 rounds of the 10, that's great. If you do 1, that's great. And then you go, okay, there's my anxiety, or there's my fear, or my frustration, or my boredom. And the reason it's a problem is because it seems fixed when it's not. So you just so you look right at it, right at the emotion or thought, and add the thing. Okay, can I see where it began? Abided for a second. Instant. Falls away. Oh, now it's rising again, falling away. It's all in nanoseconds. Okay, so that's the practice right now.
Excellent.
Okay.